back with another illustration process breakdown. Woo! Alright, so today's illustration, this month's illustration, will be Deku, my own uniform creation. Woo! So, what's interesting about this one is I wanted to do a close-up shot because basically screen on your guys' end. It might have, hopefully not though. If it did, that's why. But let's find a pen here. I want to do the breakdown of the anatomy on this guy. Alright, so basically I wanted to do a bust so that way I can focus on coloring fundamentals. All of these other illustrations, most of them, have been pretty much full-on illustrations, and they've been pretty, like, hefty, and there's a lot going on in them. So, what I wanted to do with this one is go closer in and focus in on the inking portion and the coloring portion, because anatomy and all this other stuff comes along with it, but that goes on in my anatomy tutorials and stuff like that. So I really wanted to focus on this, so maybe it will help you guys, so that way I could do something smaller that will go faster, and I could slow it down more and you guys can see more of what's going on. But in any case, a few things to keep in mind that I show you guys is I do the lighting from around up here. These are the forms that take place in this. So there's a let's create another one. Let's bring it to the bottom and let's make it white. And then let's go back up here. Let's go here and bam. Okay. So just focusing a little bit on the forms here. It's really important to understand the forms in order to be able to color your illustrations properly, and even just for anatomy and just in general, it's really important to understand these forms, like how this line is curving this way. That's how I was able to do these lines properly there. How this is going this way, curving the opposite direction of these. That's how I was able to do these folds here. Let's do those folds in blue. That's how I was able to do these folds here. They curve this way along with how the arm is moving. Now these over here, essentially the form on these chest plates, and you can see they're curving like this, they're curving like this, and it's curving over here. If the light is coming over here, more light's going to be hitting this area and less is going to be hitting this area. And so that's what's so important about understanding the form. So this is obviously going to be one of the things that gets the least amount of light within this whole drawing, these back parts over here. And there's a important point in the illustration where you see me change the angle of this little thing here because it wasn't following the proper angle. There's a point here where everything starts going downward like this, and this goes up like this, and that's part of the shirt, and I had made a mistake and I made it go up like that. I could have made it still had it go up like that. I would have had to make it a little bit less, but I decided to go downward with it. And let's get the head here. Oh, well, this eye line's pretty simple. It's not very curved or anything. Alright, so the form lines here are really interesting, the way they move, because the area around the nose is really shallow for anime characters. Alright, now let's get some red in here. And yes, the eyes do have a somewhat circular-ish form. Not circular, but it pops out like a little water droplet. So it's important to understand all these forms in order to paint it, like I said. And let's go down here, do blue. Oh, back up here to the pen. I'll do this stuff for you guys. That way, got a good idea. You can also follow this for like how to. It really helps seeing these form lanes. At least it did for me, understanding the character and what I'm thinking of when I'm doing a lot of this stuff. So that's the general form of pretty much the whole character broke down there for you guys. Alright, so let's get into the illustration. So I want to lock this, grab that, and turn it orange. Is that up here? That's weird. I don't know where that line is from. Did I actually draw? Oh, I drew it on the actual illustration. Fantastic. Alright, let's grab it and erase. Erase it, and then I'm going to go up here and draw it again. Just because I want to make sure that it's there for you guys. The sun. La la la. There we go. Alright. So we're going to take this, put it down real quick, and let's get into the video. I know that was a long beginning, and sorry if it was a long beginning, but I want to make sure we got that out of the way, so that way you guys can see what's going on here. So I am, the sketch process for this is on YouTube, the full sketch process. If you guys want to see that, that is on my second YouTube channel, the Kuzo Mario channel, or Kuzo channel, which I'm sure all of you guys here know about. But like I said, I'm not focusing on the drawing portion of this one. I wanted to focus on the form of it and the in general coloring. And as for the inking, you can see I'm trying to make the lines pretty thin with some thick spots. And like my sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm a little tired. But like my manga tutorial, I talk about, it's not about the pen, but it's more about knowing where to put the thick and thin lines. And I had already talked about it in there, so if you want to hear more about that, you can watch that. But I pretty much talk about how line art is essentially contours and plus a little bit more. Lines tend to be a little bit more than just contours for manga and stuff like that, but the general idea is that they're contours. What is a contour? A contour is essentially where two lines meet, and when two lines meet, they make a shadow. Like, for example, a wrinkle in the skin creates a slight shadow, and that's what creates a deeper value in that area. So that's essentially what line art is, and that's why there's some darker spots to your line art, and then lighter spots or thinner spots to your line art, and that's what I base a lot of my line art around. And there are what I'm talking about here, there are very little subtleties, but I do them. Kind of like the bottom part of that arm is going to be in shadow, so I thickened the line. Though I did come in and end up adding a shine at the very end, underneath there. It's also very important to understand your ellipses, because there's so many ellipses even in something that doesn't have circles. Ellipses are super important. Shonen Jump notification. But this is a pretty slow ink process compared to my other breakdowns. So I hope you guys like this. I was thinking about drawing a brand new one, but I thought this one would be really good to kind of show the colors of what had in mind. And you'll see what I start doing with the colors. At first, you're like, oh, they're kind of weird. But you'll see as it goes along, it starts looking a lot better. I thought they looked a little weird at first too, but I had a vision in my mind, and it ended up working out. So now I'm pretty much just adding in the bases here. And one thing that's important, you can keep an eye on the color wheel over there to the right. I try to make everything a good amount of saturated. Of course, you can see in the blues, I like to keep them more towards the gray section, because if you go too saturated with the blues, they tend to turn really fake looking. But later on, you'll see that I end up having to turn up the saturation of everything, because when you're doing flats, they, at least this is a problem for me, I tend to make them too dark, and then I have to lighten everything up later on. So I've been speeding up my process by learning the real flats that I have to put in. But my process, you'll see me go through, and I'll start writing them down in this as well. You'll see me write them down off to the side at some point. It's flats, shades, dark shades, smoothing slash blending, color variation, highlights, and then effects. And then there's some like subcategories that I wrote down in there, but that's essentially the process that we're going to be going through here. And before we even get to it, while we're doing these flats, and this is a lot of the stuff. Okay, sorry, I got lost in my train of thought. But before it gets to it, pay attention to the color wheel. When I start doing the shades, I do my stair-stepping technique, where just the stair-stepping. It's not mine, but it's just some general rules where when you stair-step, if you follow my mouse here real quick, you essentially, on this color wheel, if I were to want to make a shade, I would move it down diagonally a little bit, then take this, the hue, and I will shift it down this way. But when I'm here, I like to shift it towards the purple a lot, even though that's against technically the rules. I just like to do that. It gives a nice little aesthetic to some of the painting that I do. But if I'm in the red section, I would move it down this way, the hue bar down a little bit. Like, for example, with this yellow that is there, you will for sure see me have to go more into the oranges. You saw me put like a little sun there just so that way you get an idea of everything's coming from that direction. So that means the shadows are essentially going to be casting. This is going to be the brunt force of the light. Everything that's in the front, and then everything that's in the back over here is going to get the shade, and you'll see me kind of put that throughout it. And of course, hair can break that rule sometimes a little bit because, there's pieces of hair sticking up in certain places, but in general, you'll see that all the shades are on the bottom parts down here, or on the back parts over here, shaded down here. Now I'm just putting in the flats, and this one I decided to put onto a different layer. I'm putting in the shadows, because this one's on a different layer, mostly because I wanted to be able to tweak Deku's hair, because Deku's hair is done in a specific way that I wanted to make sure I was able to get the colors right. So you'll see me do this, and then I realize it's a little bit too light at some point. So one thing that I like to do is I like to put the base in, then I put a medium shade. That's what this kind of is, a medium shade, the general shade. And then what you'll see us go into is what I like to call the deeper shade. So it's the shade that's deeper than the general shade, the main shade, and it's further into the creases of that general shade, and you'll see where I put them. And you'll see what I mean by creases. The creases are, I'll let it get to that part, and then we'll talk about it. And here's the skin. I had a rough time deciding on the color of the shadow for the skin. I thought it looked a little weird there. I ended up leaving it pretty close to that. I lightened it up a bit so that way I could come back and darken it up if I had to. And just following the rule of as long as your bases are good, doing the stair stepping and the hue, the little bar around the wheel, the hue changing ever so slightly, you should get some good shadows. So now I'm still doing the general shadow. I'm still getting, this is when I start writing down my processes in here. So I got the flats down, the general shades down, and now we're going into deep shades. And now you can see what I mean here is I went from deposit. Oh boy. Alright, sorry about that, guys. So basically I went from this shade here, which is up towards this area, and then I moved this bar down, and then I moved this further, and that's to get the deep shade. So remember, if something's darker in an illustration, that is the vertical way on the square. If it's more saturated, which is just essentially the deepness of the color that you're in, if it's more towards gray, washed out, or if it's more towards orange, like the deeper orange, the more saturated version of it, that is just color. This is value. Values are very important. If I were to take this and have your color be here and then only move over here for a shade, it's not going to be a shade. That's going to be a color variation because that's not moving downward. This is shade. This is value. And I mention this in every video, every breakdown I do, but values are super important. It could be what's wrong with your illustration. You can see me putting in the shades here. I knew there was going to be a backlight, so I put and then I kind of threw in a little bit of extra blue on top with an airbrush. So if you're wondering what all the brushes I'm using, they are up here to the right. So I'm using the oil paint flat brush on Clip Studio. And then another brush I use is the airbrush, the big airbrush, the soft one. Those are the ones I use the most in this illustration. So right now the colors look a little sloppy. Essentially what I'm trying to show you guys is how to take a simple anime cell shade, which is what this is. I did it a little bit sloppier than a simple anime cell shade, but that's what this part is right here. And then turning it into something more painterly. Now we're getting into the part where we're doing a little bit of blending, and I realized I had to write it down. So blending. Right now what we're doing is deeper shades mixed with blending. So we're blending in these deeper shades a little bit with these already mid shades, and at some point here you're going to see me change the color of this yellow, because the yellow turned out, and some of the other stuff in this too, because it all turned out to be a little bit too washed out for what I was going for. If this can be a style of painting, actually, having it be this dull look, but I like to go more vibrant with my stuff, more saturated, and that's a thing that I've been having a problem with, starting off saturated. And that's a part of my process that I've been working on, is if I start off saturated, I cut out a huge step in the middle, because a lot of the times I don't feel like it's turning out right, and that's because the colors aren't where I want them to be. So my bases start off a little bit too dull meaning they're just a little bit too far over to the gray area on the square. So the hue's a little bit too low. No, I'm just getting the eye shades in. As you can see here, a big general thing I do with the eye shades is I put in the base color, and obviously like the dark parts here and the dark part there, but that for the pupil, but I put the base color of the eye in, then I put a kind of like primary shade like this in a crescent, and then I put a deeper shade in a crescent, and then I put a highlight on the very bottom part, and that's just for the kind of like the bangs, the nice little, it creates the eye that I like going for. Now this is the part where I am changing all the colors. You can see, let's skip back just so you can see the color difference. There it is before, and here it is after. Before, after. It doesn't look like that much, but if you look at the yellow, it becomes a lot more vibrant, and the orange becomes a lot deeper. And that's where I need it. I need a deeper orange and a slightly brighter yellow, because then it makes the shadows feel deep. So the oranges turn more, and this is more grayish, It obviously doesn't look gray, but I'm saying it's towards the gray on the square. So we go forward. Now it looks like it's much more towards this area. Not exactly over here, but probably around here in the yellows. But oh, sorry, oranges. You can see me, I do this with everything here because I felt like everything was just a little bit too dull. And then I go and move on with the deeper shading, and this is just kind of a cleanup because I actually didn't shade that in at all. I didn't color it at all. So every once in a while, if you see something that you need to fix or change, or little changes throughout the illustration, you can do that as you go. And notice the color. This looks gray, but then the shadow looks purple, which gives the whole glove somewhat of a purple vibe, which is something I like doing. A grayish color, but that gray is actually closer to blue, for sure. You can't see it, but it's probably about right here. So it's not gray. If you go all the way gray, it looks weird. So you want to keep away from all the way gray with a lot of your stuff. Like this, his armor, it looks gray, but it's definitely a variation of blue, a blue hue. And you can see all the colors I'm using. When I go really deep with the colors, one thing to remember is if I used an actual flat pen, it would turn out being really dark. But since I'm using a brush that has density sensitivity, oh, I just did something there I want to talk about. Density sensitivity. It dulls down the strength of that, so sometimes I have to go a little deeper when I'm doing darker colors. But in any case, so what I did there was I took the airbrush. Oh, sorry. Right about here. Okay. So I take the airbrush and I just go over it with that blue color. You can see a blue color down here. It's over a green, but I use this blue because the darker part of a green is a blue. So I use a dark blue, but it's like a baby blue, to ever so slightly run over the back of Deku's hair to give that, once again, the lighting's coming from this direction, so the back part's going to be shaded. And I wanted to give a nice gradation with just a airbrush instead of painting it. So basically the fundamentals of painting are understanding the form that you're painting, so you know how to cast the shadow and lights, and you also have to know how shadows and light works, but you have to understand the form of the object, and then you have to understand values and color theory. Those are the three things: form, value, color theory. And then, see, value goes along with understanding light as well. So I guess it could be four things: lighting, let's say form, lighting, values, and color theory. These are all things you can look up if you need to, or I could do tutorials on them. But I'm not like a complete expert on all these things, but I could tell you what I know. And it's a lot of what I actually preach in here. Like, for example, color theory, a lot of it has to do with, notice that in this costume, I put blue and yellow. Blue and yellow. Typically, if there's something blue, your complementary colors are going to be red, yellow, or green. And that goes from anywhere. So purple will be, or pink, would be yellow, blue, or green, technically baby blue, but sky blue or whatever. That's part of color theory. And then another part of kind of color theory for like shading and stuff is how this is yellow, but the deeper shade of it is an orangish red. So that's part of what color theory is. Understanding the color variation within what value gives you. Because you could do everything in grayscale, but if you don't know how to do the colors right, it might look washed out and weird. Alright, I'm going to have to pause this on my end. It's only going to take a second on your guys' end, just because of the video and the way my recording system works, but give me just a second here. Alright guys, sorry about that there. As you guys know, as some of you guys know if you guys watch my other ones, pretty much my recording system after a certain amount of time ends up cutting off, and yeah, then all of a sudden nothing of what I said was recorded or even the screen was recorded, so I had to start it over. But sorry, it should only take a second for you guys. But alright, now we're in the highlights section. This is where we're just putting slight little highlights on dings or following this is why I wanted to do a smaller illustration, because it's such a small area that it's like the light source is only coming from one direction. Although I did do a slight light source from the back, but I didn't make it very strong. This light source from the front hits this, there's a shadow here, which makes this thing cast a shadow below it. This thing curves this way, so there's a shadow that ends up right here because it's being able to, the light is catching this area. The light's hitting this. Technically, I should have taken this and casted a shadow right here. Maybe I do later on, I can't remember. But same thing with lighting. You'll see me do highlights. You can start guessing where I put the highlights even as we go along. The highlights are going to show up on everything on the opposite side of a shade. So it's going to be right here, up on the top here, right here, in the front here. Since this is metal, it's not going to be shaded in this whole area. I'm just going to put more like streaks of shines. But you'll see us going along here. And every once in a while, I'll use the blending brush on some of these colors, but for the most part, I just used my coloring brush. I either use the soft airbrush. I'm working on a technique where it's only the flat oil brush that I use and the soft airbrush, because you can do blending with those two brushes. Not the same kind of blending. Okay, here is where I decided to put in a soft blue light on Deku's back hair. I just like doing that. It's something that I like doing. I like doing a soft blue on the back, as if the sky is bouncing off the ground. That sounds weird, but it's called like subscattering, and the sky is always doing that. So it's a real thing, trust me. You're probably like, the sky bouncing off the what? Here I'm just putting in the slight either shines or slight lights in certain parts that I need to put. Just casting those shadows. And even though I drew the little sun, up there to the right hand side. It's not directly right there. I'm imagining it being closer to in front of him. Sometimes it's hard to find those layers when you get a bunch of them in there. And I really am a crazy person. I don't label any of my layers. I just go with it. I just try to remember it. Sometimes I lose a layer and I'm like, what the? Where'd this layer go? But I like to try to keep it kind of minimalistic with layers. Unless it's a big drawing, then it just is crazy because there has to be backgrounds and lots of stuff. No, I'm just getting those deeper shades. And also touching up some highlights. We're getting really close to the point where we're about to get to effects. Put in the eye shines there on a top layer. Decided to put in a little bit of orange on these ones, on those eye shines, because I thought it would be nice to just have a little variation, showing kind of like the light that's coming at him is orange. Put some more orange ticks just from some subtleties. Sorry, but this is the touch-ups layer where I put a layer below the line art but above everything else. And what I do is I color pick and I go in and I create a darker shade in spots that I need to, or a highlight in spots that I need to. This way I don't have to find each layer. I just do it on a layer that's above everything, and they're just touch-ups that need to happen. Once again, that is below the line art layer, but above every other coloring layer. So that way it affects all the colors, but not the line art. Putting in some little extra shades there. Essentially all I do with that is I use the selection tool as you saw me do, and then I take the airbrush and I go with the airbrush ever so slightly with a darker color, and it creates this nice little gradient. And when I do that, I like to use really deep saturated colors. Now we're moving on to the effects layers. So in this one, I use 2 effect layers. You're going to see me create a color dodge layer. You're going to see me create a shine layer, because they both work differently. And basically at this stage, I've talked about this before, I want to get the illustration to a stage where I think, okay, would I want to put this somewhere and be happy with it? Yes, I actually like the way it looks right now, and I think it looks pretty good. I could take it one step further by just doing the painting and the effects myself, or I can use an actual digital effects layer, which is what I'm going to be doing in just a moment with these effect layers. You can see the slight little light that I put in here. I use blue lights on the back end, and then I use orange lights from the front. Here I'm just doing it on the eyes here, those little eye shines to give that extra shine effect on the eyes. And that's almost it. Now we're going in with the add layer, because the add layer, the add effect layer gives you a harder shine than a color dodge layer does. Color dodge kind of changes the core color of it to whatever you're putting over it, and affects it depending on which color you use and what color is being put on, which does it with that glow too. But the glow is exactly what it sounds like, glow. If you use yellow on an orange, it will glow that orange. So I typically use it to display specific lighting. And one thing that I'll show you guys that, oh, and this is something with the line art, which what I'm doing here is I take the line art, which is what, this is a copy, you see, layer 2 copy. I copied it, put it above it, and then what I do is I change the color of it to blue, and then I Gaussian blur it. So I blur that line art, and then I turn down the density. You see this all the way down to 27. And what it does is it creates this tiny, and then I go down to this layer, you can see the 86 there. That 86 is the density. I turn down the density of the actual line art ever so slightly. That's why it's at 86. And it creates this tiny little effect around the whole line art. That's a very small detail, but it helps. And I'll show you that now, just so that way you guys can see it. But you can see this tiny little, like this little glow around the edge. It's ever so slight, and it's kind of strange. And I did use orange, like a deep red for the line work on this, but softened it up. And there was something else I was going to say, but I think I might have forgot it. Oh, that's what I was going to do. I was going to open up the illustration, and I was going to tell you guys one testament that I like to always do with my illustrations is, if I'm on the right track, if I turn off the line art and you can see, the image still reads, that means I'm on the right track. This is it without the line art. This is what painting does. Painting gets you this far. Now, if you were only cel shading like an anime, it would look like this cel shaded silhouette almost. It would look different, kind of like a colored silhouette. But when you're painting, you should have form. So when you get rid of the line work, it's like getting rid of the contours that I talked about where two lines meet. I open it up again, the contours are back. But in any case, I hope this one helped you guys, going over the coloring process a little bit simpler and in depth like this. But yeah, I hope you guys liked the Deku illustration as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.